Night. The fire's almost out. One person is awake, not because he heard something, but because he didn't hear anything. It was the silence that woke him up. Most people think that fear is a reaction to danger. That's not so. Fear is something that works before danger, long before it. And for a man sitting by a dying fire 40,000 years ago, this difference meant life or death. We tend to think of our ancestors as crude, instinctual, almost animalistic creatures, reacting to threats in the same straightforward way that a frightened antelope reacts. That's not so. Researchers studying the cognitive remains of ancient societies, footprints, campfires, and the location of campsites, have noticed something strange. People didn't settle where it was safest. They settled where the danger was most visible. Not a refuge. Review. This changes everything we thought about fear. Imagine a savanna 100,000 years ago. Not a decorative one, not a tourist one, but a real one. One where the air is thick with the smell of grass in the evenings, and the silence is never accidental. In this silence, there was a species whose eyes were directed forward, not to the sides of their heads. This is rare among mammals. This is the vision of predators. But humans were not at the top of the food chain. They were almost prey. Scientists call this the predator-pressure hypothesis. The idea that the human brain, our anxiety, our tendency to see threats where there are none, were shaped not in spite of fear, but because of it. The data can't fully explain why the human ear is tuned to the frequency of a big cat's roar, but the coincidence is too precise to be random. We didn't survive because we were stronger than lions. We survived because we learned to fear them before they appeared. This is where something that is rarely discussed aloud begins. The ancient horror was not an event. It was a state, constant, background, inescapable. The modern man experiences fear as a flash, sudden, brief, explicable. The ancient man lived inside fear, as a fish lives inside water. He did not notice it because he did not know that it could be otherwise. Researchers studying surviving hunter-gatherer societies have noticed something alarming. Even today, in some of these cultures, there is a ritualized, almost automatic vigilance at dusk, an hour that biologists call the predator hour. The body remembers what the mind has long forgotten. Now, the scale is beginning to expand, because what happened inside one person at the fire was happening simultaneously inside an entire species. Every night, every generation, for tens of thousands of years. And here comes the hard question. What happens to the psyche of a creature that evolves not to thrive, but to not disappear? We're used to thinking that evolution creates optimism, species that strive to grow, spread, and dominate. But for early Paleolithic humans, the goal was different. Not to win, not to die first. In 2018, a group of anthropologists analyzed the isotopic composition of the bones of early hominids and discovered something unexpected. Traces of chronic physiological stress, not from hunger or disease, but from what modern medicine would call constant hypervigilance. In other words, our ancestors lived in a state that we treat with medication today. Anxiety was not a disorder. It was the operating mode of the species. And that's what's truly concerning. We have inherited this system. The same mechanism that made ancient man wake up to silence makes modern man wake up to a silent phone. The same pattern that scanned the tall grass for a silhouette now scans a crowded room for a hostile gaze. We think we've outgrown this fear. We've just changed the scenery. But there was another kind of terror. It was quieter. It was more human. It wasn't a predator outside, but a disappearance within a group. For an ancient human, loneliness was not an emotion. It was a death sentence with a delay. Scientists who have reconstructed the social structure of early societies have observed that being expelled from a group is physiologically registered by the body in much the same way as trauma. Not metaphorically, literally, the same brain regions that process physical pain. Being abandoned and being injured were essentially the same event for the ancient brain. Here, two lines of terror converge, from the beast outside and from the silence within the group. And together they form something that can be called a fundamental human condition, a constant calculation of threat that is never fully turned off. Not because the world is so dangerous today, but because the system we inherited was calibrated for a world where danger was the norm, not the exception. What then did ancient humans do with this unbearable burden of vigilance? They didn't suppress it. They ritualized it: fire, singing, sleeping together in groups, not alone. Stories told at night, not for entertainment, but as a form of collective rehearsal for a threat, a way to live through a disaster before it happens. The myth was not an escape from fear. It was a technology for managing it. And perhaps this is where the most disturbing thought of this scenario lies. We still tell stories at night. We still gather around the light. Now it's a screen instead of a campfire to experience a controlled version of terror together. Survival movies, disaster stories, late-night conversations about what could have gone wrong. We call it entertainment, but it's the same ancient ritual wearing a modern mask. The silence around the long-doused campfire has never truly ended. It just moved in, to our bedrooms, to our phones, to that moment before sleep when the mind counts. For no reason. Everything that could go wrong. We haven't conquered the ancient dread. We've just learned to live inside it quietly enough to miss it every day. And somewhere in that silence, where that man sat by the fire 40,000 years ago, we sit, listening to the quiet, still waiting unknowingly for a sound that never came.